Well, it is that time of the year again. January 2014 WebBot report update. There's some pretty interesting stuff in this one. Matter of fact, there's always interesting stuff in them, but I kind of like this one. So we're going to go ahead and get on with this. And as I always say, my little precursor or pre-WebBot reading checklist to tell you is that I've been following this thing for many years. It has been unbelievably accurate many times. Sometimes it has not. Sometimes we think something's a complete miss because the date range we thought it was coming in doesn't happen. Year, 2 years later, wham, punches you right in the face. Oh my God, it was an epic prediction. Just it was off date-wise. I read the report. It's 39 pages long. And I basically summarize what I feel I want to cover. I can't plagiarize the thing. Can't read all 39 pages. That's not fair. So I pick out things that I want to pick out. And hopefully there's not additional things that I decide to leave out that you really wanted to know about. If you do, go to halfpasthuman.com and buy the report. So here we go. He says, in this data run, we need to note that at the meta or linguistic arts level, there are some surprising new areas of growth around such subjects as encryption and privacy of internet use that are clear indicators of a new level of interest in the subjects. These must be understood in their context, however. The large and noticeable change is from near nothing to slightly more than little. The issue appears to resolve entirely down to consumer issues such as ease of use, as the level of verbiage around the subjects are suggesting that there is a pent-up demand of considerable size. There are also all kinds of indicators from the other side of things, Tavistock, CFR, which is the Council on Foreign Relations, corrupt officialdom, etc., that are very much afraid of a pending breakthrough in encryption software. The idea is very chilling to officialdom at all levels and does not relate to anything like terrorism. Rather, their fear is loss of control. Also, for the first time in our processing, we have had some evidence that the powers that be are actually anticipating hard times at personal levels due to converging circumstances. This is a very narrow view, however, as the stooges / politicians and other minions are clearly oblivious to the trends propelling their lives. These include the internet going dark to their spying. In other words, the internet going dark to their spying. But also we find evidence of a greater fear set that has some new level of growth in its immediacy values that suggests that they, powers that be, are very guarded about their anticipation for success in 2014 and 2015. The implications are that some threat is looming and is, from their perspective, nearly visible. What is not apparent is the nature of the threat. So I think what he's talking about, encryption and whatnot, there's going to be companies creating encryption so that you can possibly put it on your cell phone. You could put it on your computer, right? Maybe any kind of communication that leaves your computer and goes to someone else, whether it's a Skype call, instant messaging, an email, whatever it is, will be highly encrypted. And the NSA and boys are going to be frustrated that they cannot crack it. That's what I'm gathering here. Next part here. This data run continues to provide the word disruption as the keyword for 2014. The disruption word is showing in all entity areas. So all areas of the WebBot, all the different subjects it has gathered, that is the keyword that overwhelms everything else. The disruption keyword is showing in all entity areas and is sustained as far forward as into 2014 as we can progress model space, which is about early September, with complete detail layers still gaining aspect attribute sets. The implication from the supporting sets across all the entities is that both planned and spontaneous or unexpected forms of disruption will be taking the headlines and filling our internet discussions as we move along with Terra, or Earth, further into 2014. The disruption linguistic structures vary from innovation through to chaotic responses to displacement and diaspora, which is the large mass of people moving out, moving away, running from something, potentially. The disruption sets continue to gain supporting sets through the progress of model space to its limits, thus suggesting that we will likely finish this year with disruption on our minds. One of, if not the largest of Terra entity cautions for 2014 is within a data set that is headed by fractured poles. This is referring to a fracturing of the Earth's magnetic poles such that we will have, albeit temporarily, several North Poles. It does not appear that the South Pole will fracture, though it may be so reduced as to be nearly invisible magnetically, possibly. There are several new supporting sets for the polar chaos subset that would seem to indicate that Terra, or Earth, will have several new, maybe 20 plus, North Poles. And as if that is not concerning enough, it would also appear that some of these will be going walkabout or moving and causing pretty much the frozen mammoth with undigested grass in its mouth effect, frozen solid, on various parts of the planet, if you get what I mean, and that is the keyword. When you find a woolly mammoth, like we have found one not that long ago, with tropical weather grass in its mouth, it was chewing, and it got froze to death, standing still, chewing. Something came about quite quickly, quite suddenly, that froze him. So what he's saying is with these poles, you can have a very quick, brutal winter. Now, my boss's wife texted me the other day from Tennessee. They're still up in Tennessee, in the Clifton area, which is kind of southern and middle Tennessee, so it's not the higher altitude, colder parts. And she said their high the other day was 1 degree. Not 0, but 1 Fahrenheit. And that kind of came out of nowhere. The next day it was going to be high of 40. Anyways, that's not freezing woolly mammoth weather, but sure, you'd be frozen if you're outside somewhere, didn't have nowhere to go. But that's besides the point. Next piece here. There are new sets indicating that coastal flooding from storms and exceptionally high tides driven by underseas events such as undersea volcanoes, which was a previous Webot hit and has been hit multiple times in the last couple of years, by the way. I'm going to throw that out there. So exceptionally high tides driven by undersea events will affect large parts of the planet in the southern hemisphere over the first half of 2014. However disruptive the coastal flooding is in 2014, the data indicates that it is but a prelude or opening for similar effects on both hemispheres in 2015. Most of the food crises due to transitional climate period are also extensively cross-linked over to the global POP entity or dataset and markets dataset, where a majority of the terminating sets include support for food price crises and food shortages, and food crops disappear from retail sales. Now, I started this video by telling you that some of the older data has been talking about these things, and it comes later and later. There's kind of a thing with the Webot. The more something keeps coming up in the data over all these different reports, months later, years later, more years later, the same data keeps showing up. It's kind of like it's set in stone. It's going down. It's going to happen. And I cannot tell you how frequently those words right there have been in these reports. Food price crises, food shortages, and food crops disappearing from retail sales, all generally speaking. So, one of the things I always recommended, food storage, precious metals, some average prepper equipment, of course, and keep your money out of the banking system. Put it in your safe if you have to. I'm not going to trust it. Never have, never will. And every time there's a crisis, there are bank runs. And I just heard, which I need to do another video sometime later, Russia, bank in Russia, has quit allowing, I think, any withdrawal. Not even an amount, just no more withdrawals right now. Russia. Go figure. And we have 2 suicided bankers, by the way. I need to do a video on that. JP Morgan banker, and I think a Deutsche Bank banker. Interesting. Suicided, in other words, killed by someone, looked like a suicide, or a real suicide. No telling. That happened today. That was news today. Now, if only Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs could accidentally get pushed off a building or jump themselves, that would make my day. I'm not going to lie. That'd make my day. So back on track here. We scroll down. The data shows that a March/April slam will be hitting the west coast of North and Central America. The slam is described as being a toxic wave that is so large as to be daily toxic, radiation limits reached in mere hours. This radioactive toxic wave is described as a trigger to vast social and economic changes. It is also extensively cross-linked over to the global pop entity in both food and social disruption subsets. So I'm sure you know that's Fukushima, right? I mean, we're all on the same page on that. A few of the sets in support of volcanic reformation of lands also seems to be indicating something of a bonanza of rare earths and even gold being brought up to the surface by the reformation of old hills. Okay. Other data sets are pointing to the emergence of an apolitical democracy that begins in 2014. Let me give you another disclaimer. If I had $1 for every time I heard an exact date on this Webbot report, and it was spot on, in other words, and it was not spot on, I'd have quite a few dollars in my pocket. But over the years, I've learned to still understand the Webbot's use, and that is, give me the data. I don't care too much about the dates because I just know it's coming in the near future, and that's all I need to know. And when I put my mind in that set, you can go back and see things that you were expecting that never happened, and then all of a sudden, oh my God, that already happened. Oh my, there's one too. There's something, you know. So, emergence of an apolitical democracy that begins in 2014 with the response to the hard social order stops/walls. The data would seem to be suggesting that the geek culture reaction, which I left that section out. It goes on to talk about this new thing called a geek culture reaction that's going to get together, try to solve some problems. They may have to hack things, literally computer things, hack things to kind of get their way, which is good for all of us, but I just left that section out. So the data would be seeming to suggest that the geek culture reaction to the species crises includes the development of direct participation democracy that eliminates, over time it will, the power base of the current political class. The self-organizing collective, or SOC, version of democracy is supported by data sets indicating a buy-in or ante-up is required, though it does not involve money as the currency to ante-up of the direct participation democracy. I think what they're referring to is come out and do something. Don't sit on your ass. Don't contribute money-wise. Get out here and help. Help us make this change. That's what I think they're talking about. The failure of the healthcare system in the USA, along with the planetary healthcare system problems, is described as bringing forth a new class of internet-based health service in the form of diagnosis centers. There are several descriptors for these that paint a picture of a range of this type of service, which includes complete clinics with automated biometric sampling and broadband-wide connections to remote located diagnostic teams, all the way down to storefront operations with timeshare doctors. Timeshare doctors on call via the internet. Button. Okay, via the internet. Let's scroll down. The data sets are pointing toward a collision of government employees and the reality of the crashing dollar as their pay scales for civil servants / military. Whispers are shown, is another section. Whispers are shown in the data as becoming logged/archived via a shockwave that is described as flowing through the internet as a rampaging botnet gets hold of hundreds of millions of always-on devices. The data sets accruing to the whispers captured surreptitiously. I got that. I got it right. I read it right. Linguistic sets point to trillions of pictures being taken in the shockwave exploit of the planetary surveillance infrastructure. These stolen images are described as surfacing/being revealed some decades later as the results of the exploit are used in blackmail/extortion. Curiously, the data sets would point to the self-proclaimed righteous as being the targets of the blackmail. Within the global pop entity, there are a number of sets going to the idea that there will be a planetary rebellion as news/information comes out about plunging birth rates for humanity globally. There will be many cries and calls for consultations and committees and other forms of investigation, while at the same time there are forecasts for pundits of all stripes, including raving religious lunatics, who will be citing everything from their God's displeasure with XYZ or whatever through to include GMO foods as well as Fukushima radiations to chemtrails and other geoengineering as the cause of the rapidly falling birth rates. Further problems with procreation will include mutations as well as staggering numbers of abnormal births. This year, 2014, will be viewed as the tipping point for the procreation crisis. The longer-term data sets are forecasting that the birth rate crisis globally will still be an issue 10 years later and on, and there are some hints that a resolution or understanding of the procreation abyss is not going to be developed for another 30 years. The data sets indicate that 2014 through 2017 will be a flush period in which the early fruits of decades of research into fringe thought will be visible as the new electrics begin to produce devices and products that will be high prized or sought after by the visionary adopters. I may just cut into another section here, actually. Highly sought after by the visionary adopters. The data sets accrue supporting sets with very extensive crosslinks over to the markets area, within which we find Terminator pointing, this is Webbot lingo, to a Russian global serving manufacturing industry that will be providing HPELP, which they're calling high performance, extreme low power devices. These are initially shown as being in the categories of home cooking appliances and home medical devices. Please note that the crosslinks from the global population Russian innovation subset through to the markets entity also are themselves cross-linked over to the global population entity by the way of Terra entity or Earth entity. These are centered on new electrics and new diamonds involved ? Energy forms. Diamonds involved energy forms. Still within the global pop entity subset health, we note that the number of new accretion patterns appearing as model spaces progress past July of 2014. These new patterns suggest that the spring economic crumble, or the great fold-up, has by summer, Northern Hemisphere, brought the psychotropic drugs industry, Big Pharma, as well as other significant parts of Big Pharma, to a virtual halt as international commerce is disrupted, first by global currency impacts of U.S. dollar devaluation, then by what he is calling, the Webbot came with this word, space alien wars, and then he's got another thing saying within the oceans ? Huge levels of crosslinks over to the outer space entity dataset. Take that for whatever. Other sets within the medical device subset includes a set that shows the rampaging disease within prisons, both commercial and invisible, such as CIA, is going to cause the revealing of a secret prison system. A subset of the secret prison revelation is gaining supporting sets under the crashing of the dollar that indicate that the payment of the subcontractors, food services, fuel, energy for those facilities will go bad, and that a result of non-payment will be vendors who will demonstrate right outside these secret facilities demanding their money. There are several new accrual patterns indicating huge levels of power shifting over the course of 2014. These patterns are pointing at some large elitist meeting about mid-year in which counter meetings, public demonstrations, will take a radically new direction. In this case, the data suggests that people, protesters, will employ drones. And let me talk to you about that. And many new forms of surveillance to totally ruin the elitist meeting. Further, the meeting itself is described as breaking down due to the new rule of law, aka the people's surveillance, and data releases. The level of new technology data capture around the elitist meeting are going to, for the aware observer, act as a huge temporal marker for power shifting from the elite to over to the, what he's calling, techno self-organizing collectives. So what kind of drone are the people going to deploy on the elite at their probably Bilderberg meeting or some other elite meeting? Have you ever seen these electric RC helicopters? More specifically, the kind they call the quadcopter, which instead of having a regular rotor blade or a main blade and then the back rotor blade, tail rotor blade, this thing has 4 main blades in a perfectly square usually. And they are extremely stable. They can carry a very nice payload, such as a camera, video camera. Not only that, you can put an additional camera on it that you can see through a remote headset that you wear, little glasses, and you could visibly see live out of the damn little helicopter you're flying around that's like, you know, this big. And then have it just tell it to hover. They have GPS in these things, some of them. They can auto-stabilize, sits completely still, while you manipulate on your control stick the camera, or you just move the actual vehicle, depending on what kind of system you have. And at the very low end, about $1,100 to $1,200, you can have a very nice, fully functional system. And they are gaining more and more ground. A lot of TV shows are now using those things instead of hiring a helicopter with an HD camera, using all that fuel, paying the high cost of employing a helicopter. They employ one guy with one of these very stable quadcopters and an HD camera on it and get the same footage for unbelievable fractions of the price. That, my friends, is what the people will be using. Mark my words. Why? Because I want one of those damn quadcopters so bad. Do I have any rich subscribers that want to donate like $1,200 for my toy? I'm just going to throw that out there. If you want to give me $1,200 to throw at a freaking quadcopter, you may see JSNet4 at the Bilderberg meeting. Live. This is JSNet4 live. We'll do it live. Back on track. Okay? Got to get back on track. Got a little bit more. Not a little bit more. We're about a third of the way through. And yeah, my nose itches and all this. I'm doing it right on camera. I don't have time to edit this out. We're doing it live. We're doing it Bill O'Reilly style. Okay. There are several subsets that indicate that a global philosopher will reluctantly be used as an algorithmic visionary leader of the techno self-organizing collective revolt. Much of the impact of this algo seer philosopher leader person will gain much of his or her fame from this person's ability to create a new language. This language invention component was an obvious magnet for our processing here at Half Past Human, the Webbot guy. Even so, the data sets are quite extraordinary in that the algo techno revolt will be inextricably wound into new language about human experience as network-absorbed beings. Much of the new language is describing instant network effect that will be at the command of the algo techno revolters. This new language is not being described as a computer programming language, but rather as described as a human experience modeling language that escapes the laboratory and is close to an instant hit within aware people, those of us aware who catch this, across the planet. Along with the techno self-organizing collective revolt in 2014, again, I know it gave a year, maybe it's next year, maybe it is this year. With the currency collapse, reset thing right around the corner, Chinese bank about to fail in a few days, very possible that this is one of those ones where it gets the year exactly right. So along with the techno self-organizing collective revolt, as they're calling it, in 2014, the datasets are also filling with support for social order breakdown. As commerce collapses, and it says see market section below, which we will get into, this social order collapse linguistic structure is very large, spans several entities or different areas of the WebBot data, different topics, and is very detailed. It paints a dismal picture of conditions within the former Americo-Anglo Empire. These dire, dismal conditions are filled with language that would easily populate Great Expectations by C. Dickens, which I believe is Charles Dickens. We have new sets that go to the idea of lines of women/men/children prostituting themselves outside of grocery stores due to bad conditions economically. Of malls and other empty commercial buildings being taken over by various forms of self-governing mobs of people. These collective free squatters, mobs, whatever, are described as frequently or mostly being outside of officialdom or government control. In several of the data sets, shorter and longer term values are going toward squatters, camps/takeovers that will grow to become major cities/economies. In some of the sets, there are indicators that egalitarian/libertarian social orders will deliberately homestead in some of the largest former retail/industrial buildings/areas. There are data sets describing the growth industry of armed guards for produce stands/grocery stores where daily wages include access to food. There are many sets going to the idea of a general breakdown in the laws and court system due to non-payment of salaries, such that wholesale abandonment of police and fire stations lead to many areas where these and other former city council facilities type places are taken over by citizen collectives. I've been talking for 27 minutes. I'm going to read a few more, and then I'm going to stop this video, and we're going to do a part 2, because I'm almost halfway there. I want to try to get halfway so I can do another halfway, give you 2 videos to get the whole thing done with. In a rather convoluted set of interlinked linguistic structures, we note that as former top-down imposition of laws breaks down, there are indications of several victims getting revenge vigilante attacks in which friends of J. Seville will be more or less publicly executed. And J, first part of his initial, Seville, was a high-level profile child molester. Okay? And his group, his pals, are still around, and that's what they're referring to here. They're going to be taken care of, because I don't think he's with us anymore, if I recall. Other aspect sets within the larger government USA that they're calling Uncle Gus, which is government US, are growing in support of a late winter, northern hemisphere, or early spring censure of government US by the real owners, not you, the actual 7 or so people that own the government of the US, the top guys, over the broken promises to them, not to you. The data indicates that this censure is viewed by the public in some form of viral media capture. It will make for hundreds of millions of conversations around the planet as to what is really happening here, question mark. You know, like, what is going on here? Further data shows that the government US does not react well to the censure from their bosses and gets violently irate. Note also that this interpretation may be wrong and that the violence episode being forecast by several areas of the model space as arising from government U.S. may be a planned effort to recover favor with the bosses by one last desperate attempt to deliver the goods. Hard to interpret is what he's saying. The hyperinflationary, which he says, we'll talk more about that below, hyperinflationary breakdown of the dollar is basically one half of the story. There are optimistic sets about the rise of replacement systems for government as the bankster-backed political system implodes, along with dollar confidence. But there is also a very grim parallel set as our social order is forecast to go through a restructuring of values. These values are both internal, personal, as well as collectively held social values. It was a next one. This is a toss-up to whether to include this next section in the global pop entity or markets entity. The subset under discussion is headed by turning inward and is seated within global plop, but is hugely cross-linked over to the markets entity. There are also significant numbers of cross-links to the outer space entity, as well as the powers that be or powers that were entity. This set has to do with looking inward at so many levels it is difficult to read them all, let alone mention a fraction of them here. However, the primary supporting sets for the entire linguistic structure are headed by the set of trade, the word trade, which itself is supported by internal resources that in its turn is supported by no international trade. This set is in its entirety, as well as down through all the levels to the detail layer, goes to the idea of peoples, nations, that will turn their attention inward toward themselves, and that this is a manifestation of a fundamental change in humanity. Let me stop here, and I'm going to start the next one.